Local sailor Rick Townsend made a profound error in judgment back in 2002 and wound up spending 9 years in Cuban prisons, partly, he says, for political reasons. Townsend, who lives on a sailboat in Indian Harbor Beach, has published a book about his ordeal, Hotel Fidel Castro, An American's 9 Years in the Cuban Gulag. He says his case is connected to that of American Alan Gross, a U.S. aid contractor who was convicted of spying in Cuba and sentenced to 15 years. Today, we talk to Townsend about the book, lessons learned from his captivity, and his ongoing concern for the working people in Cuba. Townsend's book opens at the point when it all went terribly wrong for him back in 2002. A cab driver in Key West lured by a potential $100,000 payday, Townsend had reluctantly joined a marijuana smuggling run to Jamaica. The return voyage went badly, and he found himself handcuffed and exhausted at a marina in Havana, while Cuban authorities discovered 650 pounds of pot aboard his boat. He would soon learn how precious his simple life and freedoms had been in Florida.
I always felt, even if you have dealings with the law enforcement, there's always a sense of fairness, and courts can protect you, and you can get an attorney to help you protect your rights. Nothing like that down there. You're locked in a box that can barely fit 4 grown men in it, with a toilet that's a hole in the floor and your shower right above it.
Hot.
At this time it was cold, almost freezing cold.
Okay.
Our bunks were solid steel with a thin layer of felt for a mattress. I'd never been so cold in my life in Cuba that January that I was in there. Cold fronts would come through. Maybe the temperature would come down to 50 or so, and we had no blanket, one little small sheet, and just day after day of that and the poor quality food. They just waited until you couldn't wait to spill your guts, tell them everything they want to know.
And so you did?
Of course.
Okay, so did you go to a tribunal or a trial to receive a sentence, or what happened?
You don't even know. In Cuba, they do not tell you what you're charged with until 1 month before you go to court. And they did that. I knew what to expect because they were already handing out sentences to some of the other men that were there, mostly on trumped-up charges or completely fabricated charges of 25 to 30 years. I knew I was going to get a 25 or 30-year sentence. And they asked in what they call a petition, which is like an indictment, 30 days before we go to court, for 30 years for me, as well as 30 years for the captain. I was able to, in my court hearing, which is nothing like a trial, lasts an hour and a half. It's basically a sentencing hearing. Once you're arrested down there, you're guilty, 100% conviction rate. So we go to this hearing, and I'd prepared a 15-minute speech of plea for mercy. And so when, 2 weeks later, when I got the results of my court hearing, they did give me 5 years off for my eloquent speech pleading for mercy.
Now, had you had any contact with your family? They knew where you were? Your girlfriend back in Key West is aware of what's going on? Was anybody trying to help?
Well, what initially happened, she knew when to expect us, and she put out a call to the Coast Guard for a lost ship at sea because of that very strong cold front had come through. And I guess they started somewhat of a search until they contacted Cuban authorities, and they said, oh, yes, we have them here. And then she found out that, yes. And of course, she knew if we were in Cuba and they had us, we were detained, she knew why.
I see. Yeah. Because she knew she was in part the inspiration for you going, because she wanted to be able to retire and have some money, as you say in your book, and you were like, no, why don't you stay here for this first time? I'll go see how it goes, because they say it couldn't be too bad.
Exactly.
Okay, so you're sentenced to 25 years in the Cuban prison system here. Tell me what the conditions were like.
Oh, one thing that was good, I'll start off with that. After the 33 days of that initial detention building that was built and operated with Stalin in mind, I'm sure that's where their techniques came from. They transferred us to a prison camp in the middle of a sugar cane field, about 40 minutes south east of Havana, called La Condesa, and it was for nothing but foreigners. And it was somewhat, everyone there arrived under the same, typically same circumstances of maybe smuggling or doing some small petty crime. No, as stupid as we all were to ever go to Cuba, no one was stupid enough to commit murder or assault or robbery or something like that in Cuba. So we had this one place, it was all foreigners. And when I got there was about less than 100, maybe 70, 80 foreign prisoners there. So the respect that it was, we almost had a colony effect where our captors were so different than what we were aware of being from the free world, it actually helped.
You compare this to a gulag, though, your experience. That's the title of your book is 9 Years in the Cuban Gulag. Mm-hmm. Did conditions go downhill, and was there any kind of political activity going on in the sense that the United States government was trying to intervene, or that there was any kind of prisoner bargaining going on between there and here? What did you experience? Well,
eventually, Matt, it came to not long after, I realized that what they were doing, they collected 5 Americans.
Okay.
Myself, the captain and the boat owner that I was on, and quickly 3 other Americans. And it dawned on me that that matched the number of the 5 Cuban spies that were imprisoned and convicted back in 1998 in the United States.
That's right, okay.
And then, I'll be darned, that spring of 2003, while George Bush was invading Iraq, Fidel Castro arrested 75 dissidents under nice cover there. People weren't paying too much attention, but Western countries who were giving him aid from Europe and, of course, United States and others were criticizing him for arresting his citizens for their political views. And it seemed quickly he started arresting other men from those countries that were criticizing him. It was almost amazing. In a Belgian newspaper would rake him over the coals for what he'd done, arresting the dissidents, and 3 weeks later, here'd be 2 Belgian guys with these trumped-up charges, looking all bewildered and not really knowing why they're there.
Why am I here?
Yes. So to get back to your original question, our governments had a feeling, they knew, of course there's a lot smarter people than I am, what Fidel Castro was up to. He was basically kind of using us as hostage. You know, don't worry about my 75 dissidents. Look, I have your own citizens here. Worry about them. Or, you know, look, I've got your 5 Americans down here. Let's talk about your 5 Americans for my 5 heroes, as they're known in Cuba, the 5 Cuban heroes. Never happened, though. And they couldn't. They couldn't even consider, you know, playing Fidel's game of trading common little Mickey Mouse criminals, which we were. I would have been arrested in any country in the world and gone to jail. Not for 9 years in most civilized countries, but any country.
How did prison compare Cuba from what you understand it to be like in the United States? I mean, here we have dangerous prison gangs, but prisoners also have a chance, inmates, to pass the time, either getting an education, lifting weights, doing something. You know, what was prison like in Cuba?
For me, it was a certain level of psychological torture for the whole time. Every morning when they would count us, they would give us this communist speeches and start off with the glory of the revolution, and we would have to stand and listen to these and speeches, and to me, it was terrible. They would bring in all types of government officials to give their speeches to the foreign prisoners, almost like we were at the zoo. You know, it was almost maybe a pilgrimage for all these different Cuban officials to come and look at the foreign prisoners all lined up and everything. But your point of American prisons being dangerous, none down there because of 2 things. One, if in this La Condesa place, the prison camp out in the sugarcane field, if you showed any emotion, either anger or any type of bad behavior, they would send you to what we nicknamed the big house. a prison that was 4 stories, 4 buildings, held 10,000 prisoners. No one wanted to go there. And another thing, in Cuba, if you commit a crime while you're in prison, like bloody someone's nose, you have to serve that 5 years for bloodying someone's nose, plus you have to serve 3/4 of your original sentence. So all those people with 20 to 30-year sentences, who wanted to stay in Cuba for that period of time?
Right.
We wanted out of there at all costs. So even the bad boys kept their mouth closed.
What was for you, what was the low point for you there? At some point did you think, I'm not going to make it?
Oh, gee. When there's more than one, really more than one. Probably in 6 years into it, I had some health problems, and it just felt like I wasn't going to make it any longer. The year before, there had been rumors coming from the Cuban officials that there was going to be a big prisoner release, foreign prisoners, because by then we all knew we were just hostages. You know, our country could not help them without dealing with Fidel Castro and giving him something they had no intention to do. And then that didn't happen, and I believe it was because George Bush got reelected. Fidel Castro didn't expect that, and Hugo Chavez won his referendum. So his patron there was still in office down in Venezuela, so all of a sudden he's like, no, we don't need to let them go. That was a low point after that. And then in late 2011, when Raul Castro released 3,000 Cuban prisoners, supposedly through the prodding of the Pope and the local cardinal down there, including 86 foreigners, I believe it was. All of us thought we were going then, but I wasn't one of them. That was a very low point. And then 2 months later, they just came and said, pack your things. You're going home.
No apparent reason?
None.
I was going to ask you, why
None.
was your sentence? Why did it wind up being 9 years and not the 25?
Alan Gross. Castro finally got a prisoner that the U.S. government cared about. I recall specifically, I was calling the intersection one day to ask him about maybe some emails that might be coming or something trivial. And they said, can you call back later? We're having a crisis here. We have a diplomat that's been arrested in Cuba. So shortly thereafter, because I'd listened to the BBC on the shortwave, and I found out what it was, that Alan Gross had been arrested, who wasn't really a diplomat, but he was a subcontractor for working for USAID,
I believe, and he was there doing something along the lines of, at least his story was that he was delivering satellite phone technology to the Jewish population down there, trying to help them communicate with the outside world, but he was arrested for being a Cuban, or being an American spy.
Sure.
And now he is, I guess he was given like a 15-year sentence or something in a Cuban prison. What do you think is going to happen based on that? Do you think, I mean, you were not a valuable bargaining chip for the Cubans.
Exactly.
But Alan Gross may well be, now that his cause has become kind of a celebrity cause. What do you suppose might happen?
Yeah, very much so. That Fidel Castro got what he wanted. He wanted a hostage that he could trade his 5 heroes for. I think that's very important to Fidel Castro before he dies, to get his 5 heroes back. He is not going to let Alan Gross go without getting his. Now there's only 4. One got off on parole, and federal court allowed him to go to Cuba. So there's 4 now. Fidel Castro will take his last breath with Alan Gross in their prison, unless he gets his 4 heroes back.
What was your impression of Cuba as a society? I mean, granted, you're seeing it from inside a prison, but in terms of communication with the outside world, or having met and dealt with Cuban prisoners, you had some information in your book about how much these guys would earn as criminals versus how much they might earn as a supposed bricklayer or something like that. What kind of things did you take away about that?
It's incredibly sad. I had no idea, and after living in Key West for 3 times over the last 25 years, being that close, how bad it is for the common Cuban people. People, I believe, that, and I could see, because we had the low-level guards, the nurses, incredibly industrious people, intelligent for the poor nutrition they get and the education they get. They learn how to read and write, but they are steered clear of being taught how to think. They're not taught how, any analytical thinking or that type of thing. For them to have that life, and we're talking 3 generations of it now, incredible people, and it's very sad. It would break my heart.
I think you described some of the guards. Your initial impressions were that they were all about 5'6" and 100 pounds.
Yeah.
Little people.
Yeah.
Is that from the nutrition, you think?
I think from the nutrition, and people of Spanish heritage generally aren't that tall. But because the poor nutrition, and I'm a skinny man myself, but it was just amazing how small that they were. It had to be from poor nutrition. But they were very proud. They were well brainwashed in communist Fidel Castro doctrine. So, and of course, the common people were brainwashed in fear.
How did you take away any sympathy for their system? I mean, here they were trying to brainwash you. They'd make you stand there and listen to the speeches and meet their officials and all that. Did that have any lasting effect on you? No, none. It provided a great source of humor. There was almost a Hogan's Heroes type aspect to it. Okay. If you remember that television show. Yeah. There's almost some Planet of the Apes aspects of it. You remember Charlton Heston when he would be locked up and it's like, oh my, for the love of God. Well, yeah, for every day we would have to listen to those things because they would say in Spanish, but they would have one of the prisoners translating. And so to have to listen to that without saying, oh, please, right. You can't do that. They'll put you in solitary for a few days. So clarify, what happened to the other 2 men that were with you on that fateful smuggling run? There was only one. It was only the 2 of us, myself and Captain Know-It-All. Captain Know-It-All, yes. The original man, Jerry was his name, who had got Carmen enticed into having an extra $100,000. And Carmen was your girlfriend? Yes, okay. Yes. He didn't come on the boat because Captain Know-It-All had told him, you're a known smuggler. I see. We don't want to attract attention. No, he wasn't going to go now. He had money buried all over Florida. He wasn't going to go and risk getting caught if he was a known smuggler. Right. But of course, he was not. The only thing that Captain Know-It-All, knew about Jerry was he had smuggled some VCRs into Cuba for friends. And what kind of sentence did he get? He got the 30-year sentence. Did he? Yeah. He didn't make a plea for mercy. And as a matter of fact, just before we went into court, and I was finishing up my little notes on my speech, and he said, Rick, don't say anything about how much marijuana we had, because I've got letters out to important people in the United States saying we only had like an ounce of marijuana, so don't say anything about how much marijuana was on the boat. He was still delusional, thinking he had and this was a year after somehow that, the United States was going to come to his rescue. And did they? Oh, of course not. Of course not. So are there quite a few smugglers in prison down there? When I first got there, that's all it was, actually. Island guys, so Bahamians, Jamaicans. Mm-hmm. They got washed ashore in Cuba with motor trouble or something. And then the unlucky souls who were coming from South America. And we're just changing planes in Havana, but in Havana, they make you clear customs in Cuba so they can get a fee. And of course, they got to do something for the fee, so they got to act like customs agents and check out your luggage. And on their way to Europe. So when I got there, that's all it was. That was the original 80 or so men that were there. But by the fall of 2003,
There was another 70. I think Fidel Castro was trying to get up to the 75 dissidents that he had.
I see.
There was about another 70, what I will describe as gringos. United States, there was never more than 5 Americans at a time. It's not a coincidence. Canadians, Western Europeans.
So he's trying to improve his hand.
Yes, yeah, exactly. So, but all those guys, some were smugglers caught at the airport, but most were just foolish enough to think that they could be treated properly in Cuba. They were in Cuba for one reason or another, and they got trumped up charges or completely manufactured charges. I mentioned probably 3 or 4 of the manufactured charges, just pure fabrication in my book, but there's 15, 20 others.
Let me get your take on a few things that now are happening in the news. There's been some normalization, I wouldn't say normal relations, but there's been some relaxation on travel for people to go to Cuba on tourist trips. Do you have any advice for people who might be thinking about doing that?
It's risky. Number one, personally, it's risky. I would tell anyone, don't go. But in the realm of things, I think it's a good, in the long-term realm, it's a good thing because Americans need to see how industrious, how wonderful people have lived under that system and live in such abject poverty. They need to see it with their own eyes, right? If I had seen that under those circumstances, what they call the people exchanges, I think it's going to help erase the apathy that American people have towards Cuba.
That we've developed this over time.
Of course. Right? So when nothing's going to change until both those Castros take their last breath. And although changes have been happening under Raul, you can say he's in charge, but his big brother tells him what to do every day. I'm positive of it. And when they go, I hear this talk about, they're talking about the Chinese model or the Vietnamese model or the Russian model. They're studying those forms of government. That's got to go. They need to be free like any other country, any other people. And people traveling to Cuba on these people-to-people exchange will, I think, come back with the impression that those people need to be free. So when the time comes, both Castros take their last breath, they'll have American public opinion behind them because they're going to need tons of economic aid and expertise to move into the 21st century.
The other thing that's in the news right now in Florida is efforts to legalize medical marijuana in Colorado. It's practically legal. What do you make of those efforts? At one point, it was something that would get you in prison for a decade. Now, they're relaxing. Sure. What do you make of that? Well, I used to smoke a little marijuana when I was a kid, but not much after I was 18. It made me stupid, so it wasn't my favorite. But yeah, it's interesting that people such as myself go to prison for a very long time for something that is now and soon will be legal, I'm sure, around the country, everywhere in the country. But I've always believed that I was a hostage. It was a political situation. It wasn't, although I would have gone to prison in any country in the world for that, not for 9 years. Would you go back? Would you consider going back to Cuba for any reason? I've been out almost 2 years now, and at this point I would say no. I'm afraid to leave the country. Now I got a passport, I got my passport renewed, so just so I could maybe travel to the Bahamas and back, just out of curiosity, to see what kind of alarm bells go off when I come back into the country, because I'm sure I'm in a DEA database or a customs database. I don't have a record in the United States, none whatsoever, but I'm sure I'm in there. So, tell us how we can buy the book. My book is self-published. I felt a compulsion to get it out quickly as opposed to spending time trying to find a literary agent and then a publisher. It's available on Amazon.com only, ebook or paperback. Okay. And it's very reasonably priced. And for your listeners, January 29th
and 30th, I will have 2 free days on Amazon.com where the ebook will be for free. So please,
that's great.
Get my book and read it and tell your friends.
It's a fast-paced book. It's well organized, and I thought it was a pretty interesting read. Thank you so much for coming in and talking about it.
Thank you for having me, Matt. Thank you very much.
Well, that's our show. Hope you enjoyed the interview. Again, look for Rick Townsend's book on Amazon.com. As always, you can send me your feedback on this program in an email to letters@floridatoday.com. I'm Matt Reed. We'll see you right here next week on WEFS and FloridaToday.com.